Good evening, everyone. Welcome. First of all, well done. I'm sure you're very pleased to get here. I think it's really great to see the leadership that Rob and Richard have shown and that the FSC members have shown to get to this point. I have said before in other contexts that I do see an important role for industry associations, especially those that don't spend the whole time rubbishing the regulator. Or indeed rubbishing each other whilst we're at it. So I know getting here took a lot of corralling from both Rob and from Richard. And whilst it's great to see it land, I think possibly the amount of work that had to be done to get it here might say something about leadership within financial services in New Zealand, and maybe some of the uncertainty at the top of some of the New Zealand firms about what their role is in that respect. So I think here the FSC has taken a really big lead in providing that leadership, and given how close it must have been for the FSC to disappear altogether, I think Rob in particular has done a fantastic job of not only keeping it alive, but actually getting it to get to this point. So Rob, congratulations. You and I talked a lot at the time about leadership in the industry and about what an industry association could bring. So I do think this is a really major milestone, both for the FSC, but more importantly, I think for the industry as a whole, particularly against a very uncertain backdrop in terms of what's going on in Australia, our own conduct and culture review, a number of government reviews of various bits of regulation of financial services. So good to see leadership stepping up at a time where people are really quite uncertain about what the next 6 months will bring. So in terms of industry associations as a whole, and I think the FSC, I've sat on a couple myself. I've seen some good ones and some less good ones. I think having an effective industry association really helps in the debate of those difficult industry issues that can't be solved with a couple of conversations. I think that's an important recognition that most of this is not easy, to your point, Richard. But I think also an industry association like this can really promote the viability, the economic well-being of the sector and the customers that it serves. So with both Rob and Richard, and indeed a couple of the other industry associations who are represented here, I've always tried to emphasize the connection with customers. So if an industry association is spending its whole time lobbying regulators or delving into difficult technical interpretations of the law, frankly, I think they're missing the point. The most important thing should be engaging with the customers and the consumers of those financial services and products, and trying to make sure that those consumers can see an industry that's prepared to talk to them with one voice. So I think that's critically important. I think the FSC has been doing a really good job of that. So as Richard said, I'm also talking tomorrow. I didn't realise I was going to have to produce a different speech, so I'm going to go away and write a different one. I'm going to be talking about trust within financial services, and I don't think you're going to be that surprised to hear that, in my view, there's not a lot of that around. On a serious note, what has happened over the last 5 to 10 years in a number of jurisdictions, but right now manifesting itself most dramatically in Australia, I see that as an affront to all of us who spent our careers in financial services. It's an affront to us, and it's an affront to the customers who have no choice but to buy financial services or products from the industry, and that's everybody. So the damage that's been done by what we're seeing being played out in Australia, and that we've already seen being played out in other jurisdictions, it really must not be underestimated, particularly against a backdrop of talking about trust. And some of that damage is being felt here, and will continue to be felt here, whilst certainly the Royal Commission is going, and quite possibly well beyond that. If you look further afield, just to pick out some of the more dramatic issues around trust, you think of Wells Fargo, you think of the mis-selling of payment protection insurance in the UK, you think about LIBOR and a bunch of places. Some of those things might feel geographically and culturally quite distant to New Zealanders, but I think it would be a mistake to look at them that way, and it would be a particular mistake to look at what's going on in Australia in that way right now. So for instance, particularly for this audience, last week ASIC released a couple of reports into the insurance industry, and it wasn't pretty. To quote James Shipton, the ASIC chair, talking about life insurance specifically, life insurance is a long-term product, but cancellation rates and poor claim outcomes show that people are being sold products they don't want, can't afford, or that don't perform as they expected. At the same time, ASIC released another report which was based on a survey they'd done of consumers and how they interacted with insurance products generally. And they found, perhaps not surprisingly, that consumers really struggle with life insurance, particularly life insurance that's directly sold as opposed to sold through an advice channel. And they really struggle with the complexity of products being offered to them by the insurance sector, and their understanding of the key features of what they're buying is incredibly poor once it's tested. And for those of us who've done surveys into KiwiSaver, for instance, and people's understanding of how that product performs, which really ought to be relatively straightforward, I think that lends support to the view that you can easily overestimate the ability of customers to really understand some of the products that the industry sells them. So I don't know where some of the government reviews of regulation will land. I think particularly insurance regulation, obviously that's going to be a key feature for us, I suspect. That work may be influenced by some of the work we've done to date. I hope so. It will undoubtedly be influenced by some of what we see in our conduct and culture review for life insurance. I would imagine it will be influenced by the ASIC reports, and I would think it will be influenced by the next stage of the Royal Commission, which is looking at insurance. So they'll be taking their lead from a lot of things that have not necessarily gone especially well. For what it's worth, the stage of the Royal Commission after that is looking at the regulators, the performance of the regulators and the powers of the regulators. So it'll be my turn to shift uncomfortably in my seat for a couple of weeks, whilst ASIC and APRA get ripped apart, and then everyone wakes up to the fact that we've got the FMA and the Reserve Bank here in New Zealand. So on a more positive note, I think here in New Zealand, if we're really lucky, we do have an opportunity to get out ahead of some of this stuff still. The FMA and the Reserve Bank, as you know, seized the reins a little bit as the Royal Commission started to get into kind of very dramatic territory. And the review that we're doing of the banks and the life insurance sector, I think is an important piece of work. And actually for the Reserve Bank and the FMA to be working together in that way, without worrying about who, if either of us have actually got the remit, I think that's also a positive side effect. So against that backdrop and against the wish to get out front of what could be happening, or what could happen here if you look at Australia, I think it's great for the industry to have got together and shown some real leadership and really fronting up to the customer base. You know, as I've said, I do believe there's a role for an industry association to establish that trust directly without needing to be told to by the regulators, not without needing to be intermediated by the regulators. So I won't front run tomorrow's speech on how to build consumer trust, so I know you're all waiting with bated breath to hear that. But the essentials for, what was interesting me looking at the code as it developed and as it's landed, is the essentials for consumer trust that you've laid out in that code correspond, you know, really very well with all the surveys I've seen about what's needed to build trust in this space. So you start off with levels of competence and skill and professionalism, and then you go to integrity. You look at the way firms and individuals in the firms communicate with their customers. You look at getting the wiring right within organisations, i.e. the processes and the systems and the training that you have to have in place for things to work well. And then you look for an underlying culture and expectation of treating customers right. So, you know, really pleased to see all of that really echoed in the principles in the code, and I think the code does a really good job of laying those out. I will also say, in my view, and I know this was a source of some discomfort to members as this process was worked through, I do believe the code without disciplinary sanctions is barely worth having. So I'm pleased that they ended up in there. And ultimately, if an organisation like the FSC is operating the way that it does and it can, ejection from the body itself should be the ultimate sanction, and it should be one that's greatly feared by the members. So hopefully that never has to happen. And then as a final comment, actions speak louder than words. We all know that. It's great to have a code, and I'm really pleased you've already got working on the working groups, which will fill in a lot of the guidance underneath it. But you know, what I would say to the FSC members, let's make that real, let's actually put the code into action. It's not just a tick in the box, it ought to actually shape how you as an industry see what best practice looks like. And whether you or I like it, customers' expectations do change over time, in the same way that the regulators respond to changing risk profiles in deciding where they're going to look hardest. So I think the code gives the members of the FSC a real opportunity to think about what is best practice and how that changes over time, to see what's needed in terms of change, and to adapt the way they operate collectively as early as possible in that piece. If there's one thing that Australia is teaching us, it's that slow adaptation to change really destroys consumer trust in the industry and whether it's actually delivering what customers want. And it does sometimes lead to politicians forcing change through rushed legislation or rulemaking. And I think we can all say that none of us want that. So look, thank you for listening. Congratulations to Rob and Richard and everyone who's been involved in this.